A quick heads up. This story delves into unsettling mysteries and psychological suspense. Listener discretion is advised. It was the summer I finally tackled my grandmother's attic. After she passed, leaving behind a house overflowing with 70 years of accumulated life, the task of sifting through it all fell to me. My grandmother, bless her heart, never threw anything away. Every trinket, every forgotten school project, every ancient magazine was meticulously cataloged, or so I thought. The attic, however, was a different beast altogether. A dusty, suffocating labyrinth of forgotten memories, smelling faintly of mothballs and time itself. I'd been up there for days, surrounded by cardboard boxes stacked precariously like ancient ruins, when I found it. Tucked away in a dark corner, beneath a moth-eaten tapestry and a broken rocking horse, was a small, unassuming wooden crate. It wasn't labeled, unlike everything else. Just plain dark wood, scarred and worn. Inside, nestled amongst yellowed newspaper clippings and a handful of dried roses, were several small cylindrical metal canisters. Super 8 film reels. My heart gave a little jolt. My grandfather, David, had been an amateur filmmaker. He loved capturing family moments, but most of his films had been digitized years ago. These, though, looked different. Older, perhaps. Untouched. Unseen for decades. Curiosity, that dangerous siren, pulled me in. I carefully lifted one of the reels, its metal casing cold against my fingertips. The label, handwritten in my grandmother Emily's elegant script, was faded but legible. Summer 87, Lakeview. Lakeview, the family cabin. A place of cherished childhood memories, of endless summers spent fishing and swimming. My parents, David and Emily, my younger sister Sarah, and my brother Daniel. And me, a clumsy 7-year-old, probably covered in mosquito bites and lake mud. A wave of nostalgia, warm and comforting, washed over me. I remembered those summers with a fondness that almost hurt. That evening, instead of continuing my archaeological dig through the attic, I went straight to the garage. I knew my grandfather had an old Super 8 projector somewhere. After an hour of rummaging through dusty toolboxes and forgotten camping gear, I found it. A bulky metallic relic, its lens clouded with age, its motor stiff. But after some W40 and a prayer, it whirred to life. The living room became my impromptu cinema. The blinds were drawn, the lights off. I threaded the film onto the projector, the faint click-clack of the celluloid a rhythmic pulse in the quiet room. The beam of light sliced through the darkness, illuminating the blank wall with a dusty glow. Then the images flickered into life. Grainy, faded, but unmistakably vibrant. The opening shot was shaky, typical of my grandfather's style. It panned across a sun-drenched landscape. Tall pines swaying gently, a shimmering lake and a small wooden dock. It was Lakeview exactly as I remembered it. A wave of pure, unadulterated joy hit me. This was a piece of my past brought back to vivid, silent life. The camera settled, and there they were. My parents, younger, full of life, laughing. My mother, Emily, in a brightly colored sundress, her hair tied back with a bandana, setting out a picnic blanket. My father, David, wrestling playfully with a younger Daniel, who couldn't have been more than 4 or 5. Sarah, probably 3, toddling around chasing after a butterfly. And then there I was, a skinny kid in oversized swim trunks, cannonballing into the lake, sending a spray of water high into the air. It was perfect. A quintessential American summer picnic. The kind of memory you pull out on a cold winter night to warm your soul. The sunlight glinted off the water, the trees were a lush, vibrant green, and the air seemed to hum with the silent sound of carefree happiness. My parents were smiling at each other, a soft, loving glance that made my throat tighten. Daniel was giggling, Sarah was picking wildflowers, and I was perpetually splashing. The film rolled on, a silent tableau of idyllic bliss. I watched my mother meticulously unpack a wicker basket, laying out sandwiches, fruit, and lemonade. My father, ever the joker, pretended to steal a cookie, earning a playful sweat from Emily. Daniel tried to feed a piece of bread to a passing duck, while Sarah, adorable in a sun hat, tried to mimic his actions. It was everything I remembered, everything I cherished. The kind of family moment that feels almost too good to be true. But then, as my father knelt to help Sarah with her shoelace, the camera, still pointed at the picnic scene, seemed to drift slightly. Just a fraction. A subtle, almost imperceptible shift in focus, away from the immediate family and towards the dense tree line beyond the lake shore. The trees were tall, dark green, a thick wall of nature separating the cabin from whatever lay beyond. They looked peaceful, ordinary, but something in the way the camera lingered just for a moment on that specific patch of forest made a faint prickle start at the back of my neck. It was nothing, I told myself. Just my grandfather perhaps adjusting his grip or getting distracted by something off-screen. The film was old, jumpy. These things happened. The camera drifted back to the picnic. My mother was now pouring lemonade, her movements graceful. My father was tickling Daniel, who was squealing with delight. Sarah had found a bright red ladybug and was showing it to my mother. The perfect scene returned, almost forcing the previous, unsettling drift out of my mind. But the prickle stayed. It was like a faint, discordant note in an otherwise perfect symphony. I kept watching. The film continued to capture the picnic. My family ate, laughed, played. The sun began its slow descent, casting long golden shadows across the grass. The light softened, becoming more ethereal, almost magical. And then it happened again. The camera this time didn't drift. It slowly, deliberately panned away from the family, leaving them in the lower corner of the frame, their movements still vibrant but now strangely peripheral. The focus tightened, almost imperceptibly, on the tree line again. But not just the trees. This time it seemed to be searching. A slow, almost hesitant sweep across the dense foliage, pausing, then moving on, as if looking for something specific. My breath hitched. My grandfather was a man who loved to capture faces, expressions, the joy of human connection. He rarely filmed landscapes for extended periods, especially not with such a peculiar, searching motion. My eyes strained, trying to pierce through the grainy, faded quality of the film. The trees were just trees. Dark, imposing, but just trees. The shadows were lengthening now, making it harder to discern details. But as the camera paused, holding steady on one particular cluster of pines, I felt it. A cold dread, seeping into my bones, chilling me despite the warmth of the summer memories on screen. There, nestled amongst the shadows, deeper within the canopy, where the light struggled to penetrate, there was something. It wasn't clear. It wasn't distinct. It was a shape. A darker patch in the already dark shadows. A stillness that felt out of place, unnatural, amidst the gentle sway of the branches in the breeze. It was too regular, too solid to be just another shadow, too angular to be a natural part of the tree. My grandfather's hand, holding the camera, was perfectly steady now. It wasn't shaking. It wasn't moving. It was fixed on that spot. I leaned closer to the wall, my eyes wide, trying to force the blurry image into focus. What was it? A trick of the light? A branch? A rock? No, it was none of those things. It was something else. Something lurking. Watching. The film wore on, the silence in my living room broken only by the projector's faint hum and the frantic pounding of my own heart. The image stayed locked on that dark, unidentifiable shape in the trees, for what felt like an eternity. Then, with an abruptness that made me jump, the film ended. The screen went blank, filled only with the dusty white glow of the projector's lamp. I sat there, frozen, the silent echoes of my family's laughter now tainted by a profound, unsettling chill. The perfect picnic. The happy family. And the thing in the trees. My grandfather hadn't just been filming a summer memory. He had been filming a secret. And whatever it was, it had been watching them. Watching us. My breath hitched, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. The projector, still whirring softly, cast its flickering light onto the screen, the image of the family frozen in place. But my eyes weren't on their smiling faces anymore. They were fixated on that dark, indistinct shape tucked away amongst the leaves. It was barely there, a smudge against the vibrant green, yet undeniably present. A shadow that didn't belong, a figure that defied explanation. I rewound the film, my fingers trembling slightly on the old plastic reel. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the quiet room. Had I imagined it? Was it just a trick of the light, a stray branch, a smudge on the film? I had to see it again. I had to know. The footage began anew, the familiar crackle and pop filling the air. There was Grandfather David, panning slowly across the sun-drenched scene. Grandmother Emily laughing as she chased a toddler. My mother Jessica, I realized, so tiny and carefree. My Uncle Robert, a gangly teenager, attempting to scale a small tree, much to the amusement of my Aunt Sarah. The idyllic scene unfolded, a tapestry of summer joy. Then the pan continued, sweeping past the edge of the clearing, towards the dense line of oaks and maples that marked the boundary of their perfect little world. And there it was, just for a flicker. A dark, elongated form, partially obscured by the foliage, but undeniably there. It wasn't a branch. It wasn't an animal. It was too still, too angular, too deliberate. It seemed to be standing or perhaps hunched, its outline blurred by the distance and the grain of the film. But the impression was clear. Something was observing them. Something was watching. I paused the film again, the image jerking to a halt. I leaned closer to the screen, squinting, trying to force details out of the grainy pixels. The thing was dark, almost completely black, absorbing the light rather than reflecting it. It wasn't human, not exactly. The proportions seemed off, too tall, too thin, or perhaps just unnaturally twisted. There was no distinct face, no discernible clothing, just a menacing void against the verdant backdrop. A prickle of fear crawled up my spine, a primal instinct screaming at me to look away, to deny what I was seeing. But I couldn't. I was glued to it, a morbid fascination taking hold. Why hadn't anyone seen it? Why hadn't they reacted? The family in the film was oblivious, lost in their laughter and sunshine. Grandfather David, the one holding the camera, had continued to film, seemingly unfazed. Had he known it was there? Had he deliberately kept the camera rolling, capturing this unsettling presence without alerting anyone else? The thought sent a fresh wave of unease through me. Was this a secret he had carried? A burden he had never shared? I pulled out my phone, snapping a quick, albeit blurry, picture of the projected image. It was barely visible in the photo, a mere suggestion of darkness, but it was enough for me. Enough to prove I wasn't imagining things. This wasn't a trick of the mind. This was real. And it was terrifying. The projector's hum was suddenly too loud, the silent house too still. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. It was the feeling of being watched, a lingering echo from that long-ago summer day. The perfect picnic. The happy family. And it. My first thought was to call my mother Jessica. She was only a small child in the film, probably too young to remember anything truly specific, but she was there. She was part of that memory. And if anyone could shed light on Grandfather David's habits or the location of that picnic, it would be her. "Hey, Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice casual, as if I hadn't just unearthed a potential nightmare from a dusty box. I was going through Grandpa David's old Super 8 films. You know, the ones I inherited. Oh, those. Her voice was cheerful, a stark contrast to the knot of dread in my gut. He loved that camera, always filming everything. Did you find anything interesting? Embarrassing baby pictures of you, maybe? I chuckled weakly. Not exactly. Actually, I was watching the one from that picnic. You know, the one where you're really little playing with Uncle Robert. Do you remember where that was? There was a slight pause, barely perceptible, but I noticed it. The picnic? That was a long time ago, honey. We had so many family picnics back then. Was it the one at Blackwood Creek State Park? We went there almost every summer for the annual family reunion. Blackwood Creek State Park. The name held no particular significance to me, but it was a starting point. Yeah, probably that one. Mom, did Grandpa David ever talk about anything weird happening at those picnics? Or if he ever saw anything unusual out in the woods? Another pause. This one longer. Weird? What do you mean weird? Like a bear? Or a deer? Her tone was still light, but I detected a subtle shift, a faint edge of caution. No, not like an animal, I pressed, trying to sound nonchalant. More like a person, or something that looked like a person but maybe wasn't quite right. Out in the trees, just watching. The line went silent. The cheerful facade dropped. What are you talking about? Her voice was flat now, devoid of its earlier warmth. Grandpa David never talked about anything like that. He was a practical man. He wouldn't have entertained such nonsense. But Mom, I saw something. I insisted, my voice rising slightly. In the film. It's really hard to make out, but there's a dark shape way back in the trees just past where Aunt Sarah was sitting. It's definitely not a branch, and it's not an animal. It looks like it's observing you all. A sharp intake of breath. You're imagining things, she said, her voice tight. It's an old film, probably just a shadow or a smudge. Don't go making up stories, it's not healthy. Grandpa David would never have put us in danger, and he certainly wouldn't have filmed something like that without saying anything. But what if he did say something, and no one believed him? I countered, the idea suddenly solidifying in my mind. Or what if he couldn't say anything? What if he was scared? "That's enough," she snapped, her tone suddenly authoritative, cutting me off. "Drop it. It was a beautiful family memory. Don't ruin it by inventing scary stories. And don't go showing that film to anyone else either. It's just old film grain, I promise you. Now I have to go. I'll call you later." She hung up before I could respond, leaving me staring at my phone, a sense of cold dread washing over me. Her reaction wasn't what I had expected. It wasn't just dismissal. It was an abrupt, almost hostile shutdown. The way she had cut me off, the sudden command to drop it, the insistence that I shouldn't show the film to anyone else. It was too strong, too defensive. It felt less like a mother reassuring her child, and more like someone trying to bury a secret. My mind raced. Had she seen it too, perhaps as a child, and repressed the memory? Or did she know something about it, something she didn't want to disclose? Her words about Grandpa David not putting them in danger echoed in my ears. Was that a genuine belief, or a desperate attempt to maintain a comfortable narrative? The room felt colder, the silence heavier. The image of the thing in the trees, vague and menacing, flashed in my mind. My mother's reaction had only solidified my conviction. I wasn't imagining things. There was something in that film, something genuinely disturbing, and my family, for reasons unknown, was actively trying to keep it buried. I looked back at the projector, its light still casting the faint outline of the picnic onto the screen. The perfect picnic. The happy family. And the thing in the trees. It wasn't just a secret grandfather David had filmed. It was a secret the family was still keeping. And now I was unwillingly pulled into its orbit. The feeling of being watched intensified. No longer just a ripple from the past, but a present, chilling reality. I knew then that I couldn't just drop it. I had to find out what it was, and why my family was so desperately trying to hide it. My next step would be to re-examine the film frame by frame, looking for any other anomalies, any other clues that my mother had overlooked or perhaps deliberately ignored. The truth, I suspected, was far more unsettling than I could ever imagine. The old projector, a relic from a bygone era, whirred to life with a familiar, comforting sound, a sound that usually brought with it a wave of nostalgia. But tonight, that comfort was replaced by a gnawing sense of dread. The beam of light sliced through the darkness of my living room, illuminating the dusty, flickering images on the makeshift screen. A white sheet tacked to the wall. I sat hunched, a magnifying glass in hand, my eyes glued to the projected frame, pausing, rewinding, advancing frame by agonizing frame. The first few passes were tedious. The familiar scene unfolded. The vibrant green of the grass, the dappled sunlight filtering through the leaves, the checkered picnic blanket spread out like a cheerful flag. There was my younger self, a tiny figure, laughing, pointing, completely oblivious. My mother, beautiful and radiant, setting out the sandwiches. My father, always behind the lens, capturing these moments of idyllic bliss. Everything seemed perfectly normal, perfectly innocent. Too perfect, perhaps. I focused on the edges of the frame, the background, the periphery that the main action usually overlooked. The dense foliage of the woods, a dark, impenetrable curtain behind the sun-drenched clearing. I scanned every leaf, every shadow, every cluster of branches. Nothing. Just trees. Miles and miles of silent, watchful trees. Then a flicker. It was so subtle, so fleeting, that I almost dismissed it as a trick of the light. A stray dust motes dancing in the projector beam. I rewound, pressed pause. And there it was. In the deep shadows, amongst the thickest part of the tree line, a shape. Not a branch. Not a trick of light. It was an irregularity. A darker patch against the already dark background. A patch that seemed to have a distinct, almost geometric quality that defied the organic chaos of nature. My heart began to pound, a slow, heavy drumbeat against my ribs. I zoomed in as much as the grainy Super 8 film would allow, pressing the magnifying glass closer to the screen. The image blurred, pixelated, but the anomaly persisted. It was too far away to discern details, but it was there. A shadow, perhaps a figure, half hidden, half absorbed by the dense canopy. It was still, almost frozen, like a photograph within the moving picture. I advanced the film one frame at a time. Click, click, click. The picnic continued. My mother poured lemonade. My younger self chased a butterfly. My father, as always, kept the camera steady, panning slightly to follow my antics, then back to my mother. And in the background, in that same spot, the shape remained. It wasn't moving. Not yet. It was just present. A silent observer. a hidden sentinel in the heart of our perfect family moment. The sheer audacity of it, the chilling implication that someone or something was watching us, completely unnoticed by the joyful subjects of the film, sent a shiver down my spine that had nothing to do with the cool evening air. I moved past the initial sighting, my eyes now hyper-focused on that specific patch of trees. The camera panned back to me, then swept across the clearing, momentarily losing the spot. My breath hitched. Had it gone? Had it been nothing? Just a trick of my sleep-deprived imagination? Then the camera settled again, capturing my mother laughing, holding up a sandwich for me. And there, in the background to the left of the previous spot, closer to the edge of the clearing, a new, more defined anomaly. This time it was unmistakably human-like. A vertical line, almost perfectly straight, emerging from the shadows. It wasn't a tree trunk. It was too thin, too dark, and seemed to possess a subtle, almost imperceptible curve at the top, like the crown of a head. It was partially obscured by leaves, but the outline was clear enough to send a cold dread washing over me. It was standing still, utterly, unnervingly still, like a statue carved from shadow. I scrutinized my parents in the foreground. My mother was smiling, completely at ease. My father, through the lens, must have seen this. He was the one holding the camera, framing the shots. How could he have missed it? Or more terrifyingly, had he seen it and chosen to ignore it? Or did he know it was there? The thought was a venomous whisper in my mind. The idea that my father, my protector, might have been aware of a looming presence, a hidden threat, and continued filming, continued to maintain the facade of a perfect day, was almost too much to bear. It shattered the idyllic memory, twisting it into something sinister and grotesque. I pressed on, frame by excruciating frame. The figure remained, a dark, silent sentinel. It didn't move much, but its position subtly shifted, as if it was adjusting its stance, or perhaps slowly, meticulously, moving through the undergrowth, keeping pace with the camera's focus on our picnic. Then, for a brief, horrifying sequence of frames, the figure seemed to lean forward just slightly, and for the first time I could make out something else. Two pinpricks of light, reflecting back from the depth of the shadow. Eyes. My blood ran cold. It wasn't just a shadow. It wasn't just an outline. It was looking. It was watching us. Watching my family. Watching me, a small, vulnerable child, playing in the sun. The clarity of the reflection was uncanny, almost unnatural for a Super 8 film of that age and quality. They weren't bright, glinting eyes, but rather a dull, almost predatory gleam, like an animal's eyes caught in the dark. But this was no animal. The height, the posture, the sheer stillness of it all, it was human. Or something that mimicked human form with terrifying precision. The film continued. My father panned away again, probably to capture me attempting to catch a grasshopper. When the camera returned to my mother, the figure was gone. Vanished. As if it had never been there. The trees looked like ordinary trees again, silent and unassuming. I rewound, watched the sequence again and again. The subtle shift, the lean, the eyes, and then the abrupt disappearance. It wasn't a jump cut. It wasn't a sudden movement that took it out of frame. It was simply not there in the next set of frames where it should have been visible. It was as if it had melted back into the shadows, or perhaps, moved with an impossible speed, just out of the camera's view. The picnic continued for a few more minutes on the film, winding down as the sun began to dip lower. My parents packed up, their faces still serene, still smiling. My younger self, tired but happy, was hoisted onto my father's shoulders for the walk back to the car. The camera, now held by my mother, captured the final shots of the empty clearing. The picnic blanket folded, the basket packed. The trees, silent sentinels, stood watch over the now deserted scene. But I knew what was hidden within them. I knew what had been watching. The projector clicked off, plunging the room into darkness, leaving only the afterimage of the flickering film branded onto my retinas. The silence that followed was deafening, amplified by the frantic beating of my own heart. What I had just witnessed was not a trick of light or an overactive imagination. It was real, a concrete, undeniable presence in the background of my fondest childhood memory. This wasn't just a nostalgic family film. It was a document of surveillance, a chilling record of an unknown entity observing my family, a silent predator lurking just beyond the edge of our perception. The perfect picnic, the innocent laughter, the carefree joy, it was all a fragile facade, a thin veil over a deeper, darker reality. And the most disturbing question of all gnawed at me with an insatiable hunger. Who or what was it? And why had my parents, especially my father, seemingly ignored it? Had they truly not seen it? Or had they seen it and chosen to keep silent, to protect a fragile peace, or perhaps to conceal a far more terrifying truth? The truth, I now realized with a sickening certainty, was not just unsettling. It was a gaping abyss, threatening to swallow everything I thought I knew about my family, about that perfect summer day, and about the very nature of safety itself. My next step had to be to find someone who could tell me what this was, someone who could explain this chilling anomaly, before the shadows of that old film consumed me entirely. The shadows of that old film consumed me entirely. I knew I couldn't face this alone, not with the gnawing uncertainty steadily eroding my rational mind. My first instinct was to find an expert, someone who specialized in vintage media, someone who had seen it all, the bizarre, the impossible, the unexplainable. I spent days, then nights, hunched over my laptop, the Super 8 projector humming faintly in the corner, a constant, low-frequency reminder of the unsettling secret it held. My search queries grew increasingly desperate. Anomalies in vintage film, unexplained images, Super 8, cryptic figures in old home movies, even paranormal photography experts. The internet, as always, was a vast, chaotic ocean of information, full of crackpots and genuine scholars alike. I waded through forums dedicated to film restoration, obscure blogs dissecting historical footage, and academic papers on early cinematography. Most leads were dead ends filled with technical jargon about film degradation, lens flares, or optical illusions. My specific predicament, a seemingly solid, unidentifiable figure in an otherwise pristine family picnic film, seemed to elude every category. I needed someone who wasn't just a technician, but a true connoisseur of the strange, someone with an open mind and a deep understanding of the medium's history. Then late one night, fueled by lukewarm coffee and a growing sense of dread, I stumbled upon an online forum dedicated to archival oddities. It was small, niche, almost hidden, but the discussions were surprisingly sophisticated. There a name kept reappearing, Arthur Finch. He wasn't a celebrity or even a public figure in the traditional sense, but within this small community, he was a legend. Arthur Finch, the film alchemist, as some called him, was a retired archivist who had dedicated his post-career life to restoring, preserving, and most importantly, analyzing strange, forgotten footage from the mid-20th century. He was known for his meticulous eye, his vast knowledge of film stocks and cameras from every era, and his uncanny ability to discern the real from the fabricated. He was based in a quiet town in Vermont, far from the bustling film centers, but his reputation preceded him. I found an old, slightly pixelated photo of him, a kind-faced man in his late 70s, with a shock of white hair and wise, observant eyes magnified by thick-rimmed glasses. His website was sparse, almost antiquated, focusing entirely on his services and his philosophy. Every frame tells a story, and some stories whisper secrets. This was my guy. I drafted an email, then deleted it, then drafted it again. How do you explain an unidentifiable entity in a picnic film without sounding completely unhinged? I settled on a direct, if slightly understated, approach. I described having acquired a Super 8 film, a seemingly idyllic family picnic, but with a peculiar unidentifiable anomaly, in a single frame that defied explanation. I attached the digitized clip, isolating the crucial few seconds where the figure appeared, and tried to convey the unsettling feeling it evoked without resorting to hyperbole. I hit send, my heart thumping a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The response came surprisingly quickly, less than 12 hours later. Arthur Finch himself. His email was brief, polite, and to the point. He acknowledged the intriguing nature of the clip and agreed to take a closer look. He requested the full digitized film if possible and any information I had on its provenance. A glimmer of hope, mixed with a fresh wave of apprehension, surged through me. I spent the next hour carefully packaging the external hard drive containing the high-resolution scan of the entire film, along with the few scraps of information I had, the seller's vague memory, the approximate decade. Express shipping was a small price to pay for sanity. The next few days were agonizing. I tried to distract myself, but every quiet moment, every shadow, seemed to conjure the image of that thing in the trees. I replayed the clip countless times, my eyes straining, trying to find a new angle, a trick of light, anything I might have missed. But each viewing only solidified its unsettling presence. It was undeniably there. Finally, a call came, an unfamiliar number with a Vermont area code. It was Arthur. His voice was calm, measured, almost academic, but with an underlying current of genuine curiosity. "Mr. Davies," he began, "thank you for sending the film. It's a fascinating piece of amateur cinematography from the late 60s, early 70s, wouldn't you say? Excellent condition, considering its age. The colors are remarkably preserved." I mumbled my agreement, my throat tight. "And the anomaly, Mr. Finch?" There was a slight pause. "Ah yes, the anomaly." He cleared his throat. "I've spent the better part of 2 days with it. Ran it through every diagnostic I have, every filter, every spectral analysis tool. I've even cross-referenced the film stock with common manufacturing defects of the era." My grip tightened on the phone. And, he continued, "it's not a lens flare. It's not a speck of dust on the projector gate. It's not a scratch on the film emulsion. It's not a light leak, nor is it a double exposure. Believe me, Mr. Davies, I've exhausted every conventional explanation for photographic artifacting." A cold dread seeped into my bones. Conventional explanations. That meant we were moving into the unconventional. "What is it, then?" I managed to ask, my voice barely a whisper. "That," Arthur said, his voice dropping slightly, "is the million-dollar question. What I can tell you is what it isn't. It isn't human. Not in any recognizable form, at least. The proportions are off. Too elongated, too slender in places, too dense in others. It lacks the typical reflective properties of skin or clothing. In fact, it absorbs light rather than reflecting it, creating an almost void-like appearance against the dappled sunlight of the forest. And it's utterly still. Not blurry from movement, but perfectly static, as if it were carved out of the background itself." He paused again, and I could almost hear the gears turning in his meticulous mind. "I've enhanced the image as much as possible without introducing too much digital noise. I've looked at the pixel composition, the way it interacts with the trees around it. There's no detectable boundary, no discernible outline that suggests a costume or a prop. It simply is there in that one frame, utterly alien and yet perfectly integrated into the scene." This was worse than I expected. He wasn't dismissing it. He was validating my deepest fears. "Have you ever seen anything like it before, Mr. Finch?" "Not precisely," he admitted, "but I've seen things that defy easy categorization. Fleeting images in old war documentaries that were dismissed as optical illusions, strange shapes in amateur landscape films from the early 50s that were attributed to faulty equipment. These were always moments, blips, never sustained. But what distinguishes your film, Mr. Davies, is the clarity. It's not distorted, it's not fuzzy. It's just there. And it's profoundly unsettling because of that very clarity." "So what does that mean?" I asked, feeling a growing chill despite the warmth of my apartment. "It means," Arthur said slowly, "that someone or something was indeed present in that forest at that exact moment when that shutter clicked. And whatever it was, it wasn't supposed to be there. It doesn't belong." He then shifted gears, his voice taking on a more analytical, almost investigative tone. "Now, while I can't tell you what it is, I can tell you something else, something that might be more useful. I've been studying the background, the natural elements, the rock formations, the specific type of deciduous trees, the way the light falls. Based on my experience with regional flora and geology, and cross-referencing with old topographical maps, I believe I can narrow down the potential location of this picnic to a very specific type of wilderness park or large forested area. The rock type in particular is quite distinctive. It points to an area roughly 200 miles northwest of where the film was originally purchased, near the border of New York and Pennsylvania. There are a few state parks and national forests in that region with similar geological markers." My mind raced. A location. He had given me a potential location. The abstract horror of the thing was suddenly grounded in a physical place. "Why is that important?" I asked, though I already felt the answer forming. "Because, Mr. Davies," Arthur explained, "the context is everything. Sometimes the land itself holds secrets. Old legends, forgotten histories, local folklore. If there's something truly unexplainable captured on that film, perhaps the explanation isn't in the film itself, but in the ground it was shot upon. You need to understand the environment, the history of that specific patch of forest, what stories it might have to tell. This isn't just about a film artifact anymore. This is about discovering where such an impossible thing could exist, even for a single terrifying frame." The phone call ended, but the conversation echoed in my mind. Arthur Finch, the film alchemist, had validated my fear and given it a name. Impossible. He couldn't tell me what the thing was, only that it shouldn't be. And now, he had given me a direction, a geographical location. The shadows of that old film had truly consumed me, but they had also pointed me towards a new, even more unsettling path. I had to go there. I had to find that place. Because if that thing existed on film, even for a fleeting moment, then a part of me knew with a chilling certainty that it might still exist in the world. And I was now compelled to find out. My mind was a blur of frantic energy, every neuron firing to decode the enigma flickering on my projector screen. The film, once a mere curiosity, had become a portal, a tantalizing whisper from a past that refused to stay buried. I replayed those few seconds, that fleeting glimpse, hundreds of times, until the image of the family enjoying their idyllic picnic was seared into my retina, and the shadowy figure in the trees was a phantom limb of my own consciousness. My first impulse was to find the geographical coordinates to pinpoint the exact location. I paused the film on frames that offered even the faintest hint of a landmark, a distant, unusually shaped rock formation, a particular cluster of old-growth trees, the way the sunlight filtered through the canopy, suggesting a specific orientation to the sun. I scoured satellite maps, zooming in on every patch of woodland, every park, every secluded clearing within a 100-mile radius of where the film was initially acquired. It was a futile effort. Landscapes change. Trees grow, rocks erode, and what might have been a distinctive feature 50 years ago could now be obscured, overgrown, or simply gone. The grainy Super 8 footage offered too little resolution, too many ambiguities. It was like trying to find a specific drop of water in the ocean, guided by a blurry photograph of a ripple. Frustration mounted, a cold knot in my stomach. I was hitting dead ends everywhere. I tried to identify the make and model of the car. A faded blue sedan parked at the edge of the clearing. An older model, certainly, but without a clear shot of the grille or a definitive emblem. It was just another generic vehicle from a bygone era. I even attempted to trace the family, the smiling faces frozen in time. The estate sale where I'd purchased the projector and the films was years ago, the records long purged. The original owners, if they were even still alive, were ghosts, their lives reduced to a handful of silent reels. I felt a growing sense of isolation, a creeping disconnect from my own reality. My apartment became a research hub, strewn with old maps, local history books, printouts of aerial photographs. Sleep was an afterthought, punctuated by dreams of sun-drenched clearings and watchful shadows. The thing in the trees wasn't just on the film anymore. It was in my peripheral vision, a constant, unsettling presence in the quiet corners of my thoughts. I realized I needed a different approach. Instead of looking for a specific location, I needed to understand the era. What were the popular picnic spots in the late 1960s or early 1970s in this region? Were there certain parks, forgotten nature preserves, or even private estates that allowed public access for such gatherings? I started calling local historical societies, libraries, and even reached out to retirement communities, hoping to find someone with a long memory. Most conversations were polite but fruitless. "Oh, people used to picnic everywhere back then." One elderly woman chuckled over the phone. "Before all the regulations and the big parks, you just found a nice spot and laid out your blanket." But then Martha, a retired librarian from the County Historical Society, offered a sliver of hope. She was a meticulous archivist, her voice dry and precise, filled with the quiet authority of someone who knew where every dusty fact resided. "You're looking for popular recreational areas from the late 60s?" she asked, her voice crackling slightly through the phone. "Well, there was the old Willow Creek Preserve, of course, but that was developed into a housing complex in the late 70s. And Whispering Pines Grove, a lot of families went there. But it sounds like you're looking for something a bit more rustic." I described the film again, the secluded feel, the dense tree line, the distinct rock formation, the way the sunlight fell. I didn't mention the thing. I couldn't. It would sound insane. Martha hummed a thoughtful sound. Rustic. Isolated. Sunlight. You know, there was a place people used to call the Sentinel's Perch. It wasn't an official park, more of a local secret. A natural clearing up on a rise, overlooking a small valley. Had a very distinctive granite outcrop, almost looked like a giant's face staring out over the trees. Very popular for a time, especially with families looking for privacy. Then, well, it just fell out of favor. People stopped going. Got a bit overgrown. My heart hammered. "The Sentinel's Perch," I repeated, tasting the words. Why did it fall out of favor? Martha paused, and for the first time, her precise tone wavered slightly. Oh, just the usual, I suppose. New developments, other places opening up. And there were some stories. Nothing concrete, just whispers. Kids getting lost, strange noises. Local folklore mostly. Didn't help that a few of the older families in the area, the ones who had lived there for generations, always had a certain reputation for being a bit reclusive, even strange. She didn't elaborate and I didn't press. I had a lead, a name, a potential location. I thanked Martha profusely, my voice tight with a mixture of excitement and a sudden inexplicable chill. I immediately dove into the Historical Society's online archives, searching for the Sentinel's Perch. It wasn't easy. The information was sparse, mostly mentions in old hiking guides from the 50s and 60s, and a few faded newspaper clippings about local youth groups having outings there. But then I found it. A grainy black and white photograph from a 1962 Nature magazine, showcasing the distinctive granite outcrop. The rock formation in the photograph, it was strikingly similar to the one I'd glimpsed in the Super 8 film. Not an exact match given the different angles and photographic quality, but the overall shape, the way it jutted out from the earth, the weathered fissures, it resonated. This was it. This had to be it. The articles mentioned it was located deep within what was then referred to as the Blackwood Forest, a vast, undeveloped tract of land that had since been partially parceled off, partially preserved as a state park, and partially left to its own devices. The directions were vague, referencing old logging roads and landmarks that likely no longer existed. My obsession deepened, becoming a living thing, a hungry entity demanding satisfaction. I spent the next few days poring over topographical maps, cross-referencing them with the old descriptions, trying to map out a plausible route. I highlighted areas that matched the density of trees, the elevation, the presence of any water features mentioned. The feeling of being watched, a sensation I'd attributed to my own overactive imagination, intensified. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle outside my window made me jump. The thing wasn't just a shadow on film. It was a looming question mark, a silent challenge. I knew with a chilling certainty that I was on the brink of something profound, something terrifying. The logical part of my brain screamed at me to stop, to let the old film remain a haunting mystery. But the other part, the part that had been drawn into this rabbit hole, the part that craved answers, rejected that notion entirely. It was a compulsion, a gravitational pull towards the unknown. I packed a backpack with essentials: water, a compass, first aid supplies, a fully charged phone, and most importantly, a printout of the old map, painstakingly annotated with my best guess at the location of the Sentinel's Perch. The old hiking guides warned of dense undergrowth and difficult terrain. They also hinted at the isolation, the profound quiet of the place. As I prepared to leave, a final, unsettling thought snaked its way into my mind. Why had this particular spot, once a local favorite, fallen into such obscurity? Why the vague stories? The whispers? What had driven people away from the Sentinel's Perch? Was it just changing times? Or was there something else? Something that had made the family in the Super 8 film break their perfect picnic and flee in terror? I looked at the Super 8 projector one last time, the reel still threaded, the frozen image of the family's terror still visible on the screen. The shadow in the trees was a dark, silent promise. I had to go there. The journey was no longer about curiosity. It was about confronting a truth that had been hidden for decades. And a part of me, the part that was now completely consumed, knew that whatever I found, it would change everything. My destination was set. The Blackwood Forest awaited. The air itself seemed to grow heavy as I pulled my car to the side of the narrow, overgrown road that marked the unofficial boundary of Blackwood Forest. A rusted, leaning sign, half swallowed by ivy, vaguely warned of private property and danger. It felt less like a warning and more like an ancient curse. The trees here were different. Not the neatly spaced, managed woods you see in parks, but a tangled, primeval mass, their branches interlocked, forming a dense canopy that blocked out the sky even at midday. It was perpetually twilight under those boughs. I grabbed my backpack, a small, practical one I'd packed with essentials, a powerful flashlight, a compass, a water bottle, a first aid kit, and of course a fully charged phone. Though I had a chilling suspicion reception would be non-existent once I ventured deep enough. As I stepped out of the car, the silence was immediate and profound, broken only by the distant hum of an unseen insect or the faint rustle of leaves stirred by a breeze that never seemed to penetrate the forest's depths. It was the kind of silence that pressed in on your ears, making your own heartbeat sound unnaturally loud. My heart was, in fact, hammering against my ribs. This wasn't merely an adventure. It was a pilgrimage into the heart of a mystery that had consumed me. Every step towards the tree line felt like crossing a threshold, not just into a forest, but into the past, into the very frame of that unsettling Super 8 film. I pushed through a curtain of thorny bushes, the dry leaves scraping against my jacket, and found myself enveloped. The air immediately cooled, carrying the damp, earthy scent of decaying wood and ancient soil. I pulled out a printout of a still from the film, the one showing the picnic blanket, the family, and that peculiar, dark shape lurking in the background, half obscured by foliage. My goal was simple yet daunting: find the exact spot. Find the tree. Find what Sarah saw. The forest floor was a treacherous carpet of gnarled roots, fallen branches, and thick moss. Sunlight, when it managed to pierce the canopy, did so in ethereal shafts, creating an almost magical, yet deeply unsettling atmosphere. It was beautiful in a dangerous way, like a predator's smile. I moved slowly, scanning the trees, trying to match the distinctive bark patterns, the way the branches intertwined, the general topography of the area captured in the grainy footage. It was like trying to find a single needle in a haystack made of a million identical needles. Hours bled into one another. My initial burst of adrenaline had given way to a steady, grinding determination, laced with a growing sense of unease. The forest was disorienting. Every direction looked the same, every cluster of trees a potential match for the film, yet none quite right. I found myself circling back, losing my bearings, relying heavily on the compass to maintain a general direction. The lack of any clear landmarks, any trails, made the task feel impossible. Then I saw it, or thought I did. A faint, almost imperceptible depression in the earth, barely wider than a deer path, snaking between two colossal oaks. It was overgrown, almost swallowed by undergrowth, but it was there. It wasn't a human path, not exactly, but it felt used, like something had moved through here repeatedly over many, many years. My breath caught in my throat. Could this be it? A relic of the old logging trails, perhaps, or something else entirely? I followed the faint path, my senses on high alert. Every snap of a twig, every rustle in the leaves that wasn't my own movement, sent a jolt of panic through me. I kept imagining it, the thing in the trees, just beyond my periphery, mimicking the shadows, watching me with unseen eyes. The film had made it look static, a dark, unmoving presence, but out here, in the deepening gloom of the forest, my imagination conjured something far more sinister, something alive and aware. The path eventually led to a small, relatively open clearing, or what once might have been a clearing. It was still heavily wooded, but the trees here seemed a little less dense, a little more spaced out, as if something had once been cleared here. My eyes widened. This felt right. The way the light filtered through, the slight elevation of the ground, the particular arrangement of the larger trees, it was beginning to align with the backdrop of the picnic scene. I pulled out the still image again, holding it up, turning slowly, trying to find the exact perspective. My heart was thumping so hard I could feel it in my ears. And then I saw it. A massive ancient oak, its trunk scarred and twisted, its lower branches reaching out like arthritic arms. It was unmistakable. The same unique shape, the same gnarled bark, the same dominant presence. This was the tree. The one Sarah and her family had picnicked beside. The one that had stood sentinel behind them. And suddenly the clearing didn't feel like a clearing at all. It felt like a stage set for a performance decades ago, and I was an uninvited guest. I walked towards the oak, my steps hesitant, almost reverent. As I approached, I started to notice other details. A scatter of smooth, river-worn stones arranged in a rough circle, almost completely buried by moss and leaf litter. Had they been a makeshift fire pit? A boundary? And then, just a few feet from the base of the mighty oak, something else. A small, almost flat rock, partially covered by soil, with a faded, barely discernible carving on its surface. It looked like an initial, or perhaps a symbol. My fingers trembled as I brushed away the damp earth, revealing more of the carving. It was an S. For Sarah? Or something else? The air grew colder around me, despite the exertion of my search. A shiver ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. I was standing on holy ground, or perhaps cursed ground. I looked up, following the line of the oak tree's trunk, past the point where the family had been sitting, past the place where the thing had been captured on film. I scanned the dense foliage behind it, the shadows that clung like dark cloaks. Nothing. Just trees, branches, leaves. But the memory of the film was so vivid, so terrifyingly real, that I could almost superimpose the dark, indistinct shape onto the natural shadows. It felt like it was still there, just out of sight, always watching. The sun was beginning its slow descent, its golden light turning the forest into a mosaic of deep oranges and purples. The magic was fading, replaced by an encroaching gloom. I knew I couldn't stay much longer, but I couldn't leave either, not yet. Not when I was so close. I circled the area, my eyes sweeping every inch of the ground. The picnic blanket would be long gone, of course, disintegrated into the earth. But what about other remnants? A dropped toy? A forgotten piece of cutlery? Something that would confirm the family's presence beyond the photographic evidence. And then my gaze fell upon a patch of particularly thick moss, growing at the base of a smaller, younger birch tree, a few yards from the great oak. Something about it looked disturbed. Not naturally disturbed, but as if something had been placed there, then covered. My heart pounded with a renewed intensity. This wasn't just old leaves or roots. This was different. I knelt, my fingers digging into the soft, yielding moss. It came away easily, revealing a layer of dark, rich soil beneath. And then my fingers brushed against something hard, something metallic, cold. I pulled back the soil carefully, my breath held tight in my chest. What emerged was small, tarnished, but undeniably man-made. It was a locket, an antique silver locket, its surface dulled by decades of exposure to the elements, but still recognizable. It was closed, clasped shut, as if protecting a secret. The weight of it in my palm felt immense, disproportionate to its size. This wasn't just a locket. It was a tangible link to the past, a direct connection to the family in the film. Whose was it? Sarah's? Her mother's? It felt like a piece of personal history, buried and forgotten, now unearthed by a relentless obsession. My mind raced. This locket, found precisely at the site of the picnic, was undeniable proof. But proof of what? That they were here. We knew that. Was it simply dropped? Or was it left behind, intentionally or otherwise, during a moment of sudden departure? The implications were chilling. As I stared at the locket, turning it over in my hand, a subtle shift occurred in the forest around me. The air grew stiller, heavier. The vibrant colors of the sunset were quickly giving way to the deep, indistinct blues and grays of dusk. The shadows lengthened, twisting into monstrous shapes, and the trees, once mere obstacles, now seemed to press in, their ancient forms taking on a menacing quality. And then I heard it. A sound, faint at first, then growing clearer, unmistakably close. It wasn't the rustle of leaves, or the chirping of an insect, or the hoot of an owl. It was a low, guttural growl, deep and resonant, coming from somewhere just beyond the great oak, from the very direction where the thing had been in the Super 8 film. My blood ran cold. Every hair on my body stood on end. This wasn't my imagination. This wasn't a trick of the light or a phantom sound conjured by fear. This was real. And it was close. Too close. The growl ended as abruptly as it began, leaving behind an even more terrifying silence. A silence that felt charged, expectant. I clutched the locket in my hand, my knuckles white, my eyes darting frantically into the deepening shadows. I was no longer an investigator. I was prey. And I was deep inside Blackwood Forest, miles from safety, with the sun having finally dipped below the horizon, plunging the woods into a terrifying inky darkness. Whatever was out there, it was no longer just a shadow on an old film. It was here, with me. My breath hitched, a ragged, desperate gasp that felt impossibly loud in the sudden, absolute silence of the forest. The air, already cool, now felt like a block of ice pressed against my lungs, stealing the warmth from my chest. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat that threatened to burst through my skin. I stood frozen, every muscle locked, my eyes straining into the impenetrable blackness that surrounded me. The flashlight in my hand felt suddenly heavy, its beam a meager, trembling spear of light against an ocean of shadow. The woods had changed. Moments ago, with the fading light, it had been a place of eerie beauty, a challenge. Now, without the sun, it was a suffocating tomb, alive with unseen terrors. Every rustle of leaves, every distant hoot of an owl, every creak of a branch in the wind, was magnified, twisted into something malevolent. My mind, usually a fortress of logic, was under siege. The rational part of me screamed that it was just the forest, just my imagination, fueled by an old grainy film. But another, more primal part, the part that had seen that impossible shadow, knew better. It was here, with me. I slowly, agonizingly pivoted, sweeping the flashlight beam in a wide arc. The light cut through the gloom, illuminating ancient tree trunks, gnarled roots, and a thick undergrowth that seemed to writhe in the periphery of my vision. Nothing. Just trees. Miles and miles of silent, watchful trees. But the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. A cold prickle on the back of my neck that intensified with every passing second. It was like standing in a crowded room, knowing every single person was staring at you, but unable to pinpoint a single gaze. My fingers, numb with cold and fear, tightened around the flashlight. I needed to move. I needed to get out. But which way? The path I'd followed, the one that had led me deeper and deeper into this nightmare, was now invisible, swallowed by the darkness. Panic, cold and sharp, began to claw at my throat. I had no idea where I was, no sense of direction, only the vague, overwhelming certainty that whatever had been lurking in the periphery of the Super 8 film, whatever had haunted the edges of that perfect picnic, was now directly behind me, or perhaps directly in front of me. I took a tentative step, then another, trying to retrace my path. The ground was uneven, a treacherous carpet of fallen leaves and hidden roots. My boots crunched loudly, each sound echoing through the unnerving silence, betraying my presence. I held my breath, listening. For what? A twig snapping? A guttural growl? A whisper? Then I heard it. Not a sound exactly, more like a displacement of sound. A sudden, brief cessation of the ambient night noises, the chirping of crickets, the distant murmur of the wind through the canopy. For a fraction of a second, everything went utterly silent, as if the forest itself had held its breath. And then, just as quickly, the sounds rushed back in, but subtly different, subtly closer. My blood ran cold. I spun around, sweeping the flashlight beam wildly. Nothing. Just the endless, indifferent trees. But the silence, that brief, unnatural void, had been a signal. A shift. It was moving. Hello. My voice came out as a pathetic croak, barely audible. The sound felt absurd, a futile attempt to humanize the terror. But I needed to know. Was it a person? An animal? Or something else entirely? No answer. Only the forest pressing in. I started to move faster, my steps becoming less cautious, more desperate. I stumbled, caught myself, my heart leaping into my throat. The image of the thing in the film flashed in my mind, tall, gaunt, impossibly still, hidden amongst the branches. But the film had only captured a fleeting glimpse, a suggestion. What if it wasn't just in the trees? What if it was the trees? A terrifying organic horror that blended seamlessly with its environment. I focused the beam of my flashlight on the ground, trying to find any sign of the narrow, overgrown trail I had followed. My eyes darted from side to side, searching for anything familiar. A distinct rock formation, a broken branch, anything. But every tree looked the same, every shadow an identical pool of dread. Then my light caught something. Not on the ground but slightly above, on the trunk of a massive oak. A deep, jagged gouge in the bark, unlike any natural mark. It looked like something had been dragged against it, or perhaps clawed at it, and it was fresh. The wood beneath was lighter, exposed, and a faint, sweet, metallic scent, barely perceptible, wafted towards me. My stomach lurched. I leaned closer, my flashlight trembling, illuminating the mark. It wasn't just a gouge. It was a series of parallel lines, deep and deliberate, almost like a crude carving. 3 distinct lines, curving slightly, as if made by enormous, razor-sharp talons. This wasn't an animal. No bear I'd ever heard of made marks like this, so high up, so precise. It was too deliberate, too knowing. My mind raced back to the Super 8 film. The thing in the trees. Its unnatural stillness. Its elongated, almost skeletal appearance. Could this be its mark? A territorial warning? Or something far more sinister? A new sound pierced the silence. A low, raspy whisper, so faint it could have been the wind, but it felt directed. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. A chilling, sibilant hiss that spoke of ancient malice. It wasn't words, not in any language I knew, but it filled me with an immediate, overwhelming sense of dread. It was a sound that belonged to the quiet places, to the shadows, to things that shouldn't exist. I gasped, stumbling backward, tripping over a root and falling hard onto my backside. The flashlight flew from my hand, skittering across the leaves and landing face down, plunging me into absolute darkness. Terror, raw and immediate, seized me. I scrambled, my hands tearing at the leaf litter, searching frantically for the light. My fingers brushed against something cold and smooth, the casing of the flashlight. I snatched it up, fumbling with the switch, my thumb pressing down repeatedly. Nothing. The bulb had shattered, or the batteries had dislodged. It was dead. I was blind. The whisper returned, closer this time, circling me. It was no longer amorphous. It was a presence moving around me, unseen but felt. The air grew colder, heavy with that metallic scent. I tasted it on my tongue, a faint sickly sweetness that made my gorge rise. My breath hitched again, a silent scream trapped in my throat. My eyes, useless in the inky blackness, darted wildly, trying to perceive any flicker, any shape. My ears strained, picking up the rustle of leaves, the snap of a twig just beyond my reach. It was moving around me, not rushing, not attacking, but circling, observing. Like a predator toying with its prey. This wasn't just a shadow on a film. This was a being. A hunter. And I was trapped in its territory, in its darkness. I remembered Michael's casual dismissal of the film, his easy laugh about old footage. Just a trick of the light, he'd said. Emily's nervous smile, her discomfort. And then the picnic itself, the impossible perfection, the almost staged quality of it all. It wasn't just a family outing. It was a scene. A performance. And the thing in the trees wasn't just an accidental inclusion. It was part of the tableau. It was the audience. Or perhaps the director. The thought sent a fresh wave of horror through me. What had the picnic really been? What had they been doing in these woods, so carefree, so oblivious? And why had the film cut out so abruptly, right as the thing seemed to move? A new sound, distinct from the rustling and the whispering, emerged from the darkness directly in front of me. A soft, wet thump, followed by another, and another. It sounded like something heavy, something fleshy, hitting the damp earth repeatedly. It was rhythmic, deliberate. My mind, despite the terror, tried to process it. What could make that sound? It was too heavy for a bird, too soft for a falling branch. It was organic. Then a low guttural moan, like something in immense pain, echoed through the trees. It wasn't the whisper. This was different. This was raw, agonizing, and it was close. So close I could almost feel the vibrations of it in the ground beneath me. My blood ran cold. That sound. It was human. Or at least it was coming from something that could articulate suffering. My legs, despite their trembling, found strength. I pushed myself up, scrambling backward blindly, my hands outstretched, trying to feel my way through the oppressive darkness. Every nerve ending screamed at me to run, to flee, but where? How? I was deep in its domain, and now it seemed I had stumbled upon something else entirely. Something that was hurting. Something that was here. The metallic scent grew stronger, mixed now with something else. Something sickly sweet and cloying, like decaying flowers. And the rhythmic thudding continued, punctuated by those heart-wrenching moans. My hand brushed against something rough, cold, and wet. I recoiled instantly, a cry catching in my throat. My fingers, still numb, felt a distinct texture, not bark, not leaves, but something sticky. And then as I pulled my hand away, I felt it. A warm, viscous liquid coating my fingertips. I brought my hand to my nose despite the revulsion. The cloying sweetness intensified, mixed with the sharp, coppery tang I now recognized. It wasn't just metallic. It was blood. And the rhythmic thudding, the moaning, the overwhelming scent. It wasn't just moving. It was doing something. Something horrific. Something that was creating this agony, this mess, in the pitch blackness just feet away from me. I was no longer just being watched. I was witnessing. And whatever had been on that Super 8 film, whatever had haunted the edges of that perfect picnic, was now engaged in something unspeakable. In the heart of Blackwood Forest, and I was trapped right in the middle of it. The air itself seemed to thicken, heavy with the scent of damp earth, decaying leaves, and something else, something metallic, almost coppery, that prickled the back of my throat. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the sudden, profound silence that had fallen over the forest. The only sound was my own ragged breathing, each gasp feeling like a roar in the stillness. I pressed myself deeper into the damp foliage, the cold, rough bark of a pine tree digging into my cheek. My eyes, wide and unblinking, were fixed on the clearing ahead. What I saw wasn't a struggle, not a violent confrontation in the way I'd morbidly imagined. It was far, far worse. It was a tableau, a grotesque reenactment, orchestrated with a chilling precision that spoke of intent, of ritual. In the center of the clearing, bathed in the sickly, dappled moonlight that filtered through the oppressive canopy, stood the thing. It was tall, impossibly gaunt, its limbs appearing elongated, almost spider-like in their articulation. The shadows clung to its form, making it seem less like a solid entity and more like a shifting void, a tear in the fabric of the night. It moved with an unsettling, jerky grace, a predator attending to its prey. But this was no ordinary prey. Arranged in a macabre parody of the picnic I'd seen on the Super 8 film were figures. Not living people, not bodies in the traditional sense, but effigies. They were constructed from branches, woven together with vines, their forms roughly human-shaped. Leaves and moss were pressed into place to suggest clothing, and what looked like dried flowers and berries stood in for eyes and mouths. There were 4 of them, positioned around a tattered, faded blanket. The same pattern I'd glimpsed in the film, now stained and torn. One larger figure, presumably the father, David, sat upright, its twig arms outstretched. Another, smaller, was slumped beside it, a crude interpretation of Jessica. And then 2 tiny ones, haphazardly placed, almost lost in the tangle of roots and decaying undergrowth. The children. The thing moved between these figures, its movements deliberate, almost tender, yet utterly alien. It was dressing them, or rather adorning them, with what I couldn't quite tell from my vantage point, but I saw glints of something reflective, something that caught the moonlight. It wasn't a human act. It was a mockery, a dark liturgy performed for an unseen audience, or perhaps for itself. The metallic scent intensified, and I realized it wasn't just in the air. It was coming from the clearing, a faint shimmer I could almost taste. A low, guttural sound escaped the thing. It wasn't a growl, not a voice, but something deeper, more resonant, like stones grinding together in the earth. It was a sound that vibrated in my bones, a sound of ancient, unfeeling creation. My mind screamed at me to run, to flee this place of desecration, but my body refused to obey. My muscles were locked, paralyzed by a terror so profound it felt primal. This wasn't just a monster in the woods. This was something that understood us, that mimicked us, and in doing so, twisted our very essence into something unrecognizable and horrifying. My eyes darted around trying to comprehend, to find some logic in the madness. That's when I saw it, embedded in the ground around the perimeter of the clearing. The symbols, the strange angular carvings I'd seen in the photographs from the police file, the ones etched into the trees around the original picnic site. Here they were not carved into bark, but formed from carefully arranged stones and bleached bones, their stark white against the dark earth creating a chilling protective circle. This wasn't random. This was a place of purpose, a stage for a ritual that had been unfolding perhaps for years. Then a flicker of movement caught my eye, not from the thing, but from one of the effigies. The small one, the one meant to be the younger child. A sliver of color, a vibrant red, peeked out from beneath the moss and leaves. It was a small rubber ball, deflated and grimy, but undeniably a child's toy. It was the same red ball I'd seen in the Super 8 film, bouncing carelessly across the picnic blanket, disappearing just out of frame. It was a direct, undeniable link. This wasn't just a general act of horror. This was their horror, the horror of David, Jessica, and their 2 lost children. The thing wasn't just an entity, it was the architect of their disappearance, the sculptor of their fate. A twig snapped beneath my foot. The sound was impossibly loud, shattering the fragile silence of the clearing. The thing froze. Its head, which had been bent over the effigy of Jessica, snapped up. Even in the dim light, I could feel its gaze sweeping across the dark trees, a palpable wave of predatory awareness. Every nerve ending screamed. I had been seen, or at the very least heard. Panic, cold and sharp, finally broke through my paralysis. I pushed myself away from the tree, scrambling backward on my hands and knees, desperate to put distance between myself and that unholy scene. My heart was a frantic bird trapped in a cage, beating against my ribs until I thought they would crack. My breath hitched in my throat, a choked gasp. I had to get out. I had to run. But the forest, which had once seemed a mere backdrop to my investigation, now felt like an active participant, a living, breathing entity closing in around me. The branches seemed to reach out like skeletal fingers, grasping at my clothes, tearing at my skin. The undergrowth became a treacherous maze of roots and unseen obstacles. I stumbled, falling hard, my hand landing in something slick and cold. I didn't dare look, simply recoiled, pushing myself up despite the searing pain in my ankle. A rustling began in the clearing, a quick, dry movement of leaves. The thing was coming. I could hear its peculiar, disjointed gait, the scraping of its elongated limbs against the rough earth, drawing closer, faster than anything that size should move. Fear lent me a desperate strength. I plunged deeper into the trees, not caring where I was going, only away. The forest became a blur of dark shapes and fleeting shadows. I ran until my lungs burned, until the air felt like shards of glass in my throat. I could still hear it, that unsettling scraping sound, sometimes closer, sometimes seeming to flank me. It was hunting me, and it knew these woods far better than I ever could. I burst into a small, unexpected hollow, a slight depression in the ground, almost like a natural amphitheater. The moonlight here was almost completely blocked by a dense overhead canopy. I dove behind a thick cluster of ferns, trying to control my ragged breathing, pressing my hands over my mouth to stifle any sound. The scraping stopped. A profound silence descended once more, but this was a different kind of silence. It was heavy, expectant, filled with a palpable sense of presence. It was the silence of a predator waiting, listening. I could feel its eyes on me even though I couldn't see it. It was toying with me, letting me believe I was hidden, only to strike when I least expected it. Every muscle in my body thrummed with adrenaline. I slowly, painstakingly, dared to part the ferns just a fraction to peer out into the darkness. Nothing. Only the oppressive gloom of the forest. My mind raced, trying to find an escape, a way out of this nightmare. Then my gaze fell upon something in the hollow itself, almost at my feet, obscured by the ferns and the shadows. It was a small, crudely built lean-to, fashioned from fallen branches and large, overlapping leaves. It looked ancient, almost assimilated into the forest floor. And lying just inside its opening, half buried in the damp earth, was a small leather-bound journal. Its cover was water-stained and warped, but unmistakable. It was the same kind of journal I had seen in the police photos, the one David, the father, was supposedly always carrying, filled with his sketches and notes. My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't just a relic. This was a direct link to the man himself. A voice from the past, perhaps the only one that could explain the unspeakable horror I had just witnessed. As I reached out a trembling hand to grasp it, a guttural rasp echoed directly above me, a sound that was less a noise and more a vibration of pure malevolence. A dark, elongated shadow fell over me, plunging the small hollow into an even deeper, more absolute darkness. It had found me, and I knew with a certainty that chilled me to my very core, that whatever was written in that journal, I might never live to read it. The thing was here, right above me, and it was no longer waiting. The air above me thickened, becoming heavy, suffocating. It wasn't just darkness, it was a hungry void pressing down, a tangible weight that seemed to vibrate with an unseen, unheard energy. I could feel something descending, a cold, alien presence that seeped into my very bones, making every nerve scream. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. My breath hitched, caught in my throat, refusing to obey. I scrambled backward, a desperate, animalistic instinct taking over. My hand, still clutching the journal, scraped against the rough attic floorboards. I didn't dare look up. I couldn't. My eyes were glued to the trapdoor, barely visible in the faint light filtering from the hallway below. The wooden ladder, my only escape, felt impossibly far away, an insurmountable climb to safety. A low, guttural sound, not quite a growl, not quite a whisper, seemed to emanate from the very fabric of the darkness above. It was a sound that didn't belong to any living creature I knew. A sound that spoke of ancient, primal hunger. It vibrated through the floorboards, through my chest, through my skull. My ears began to ring. Panic, cold and sharp, seized me. I rolled onto my stomach, pushing myself forward with my elbows, dragging my legs. The journal was still clenched in my hand, its worn leather cover digging into my palm. Felt like a lifeline or perhaps a death warrant. I didn't know. All I knew was I had to get out. Now, the sound intensified, closer now, directly above me. I felt a pressure like a massive unseen hand pressing down on the air around me. Dust motes, caught in the sliver of light, danced wildly, as if disturbed by an unseen current. I could almost feel a cold breath on the back of my neck, devoid of moisture, devoid of warmth. With a surge of adrenaline, I pushed myself to my feet, my legs wobbly beneath me. I didn't run, I lunged toward the trapdoor, a frantic, uncoordinated dash. My fingers fumbled for the edge of the opening, desperate to pull myself down. But then a shadow, deeper than any natural darkness, detached itself from the ceiling directly above the trapdoor. It was formless yet impossibly dense, a swirling vortex of absolute black, blocking my escape. It hung there, pulsating faintly, a void within a void. I froze, my hand hovering inches from the trapdoor. My mind screamed at me to move, to fight, to do something, but my body was paralyzed by a terror so profound it felt like an electric shock. This wasn't just a monster in the dark. It was the darkness itself, given malevolent intent. Then a flicker. Within the swirling blackness, for just a fraction of a second, I saw something. Not eyes, not a face, but an impression. A deep, unsettling pattern, like intricate, shifting lines of pure shadow, briefly coalescing before dissolving again. It was a fleeting glimpse, but it etched itself into my memory. A geometric impossibility, a design that seemed to defy the laws of physics and perception. It was ancient. It was wrong. My paralysis broke. Not with courage, but with a primal, overwhelming need to survive. The trapdoor was blocked. I had to find another way. But where? The attic was a single open space. There was nowhere to hide. I spun around, my eyes darting frantically. The old wooden beams, the boxes of forgotten memories, the dusty insulation. Nothing. There was nothing but the encroaching darkness and the thing that inhabited it. My gaze fell upon a small, dusty window covered by a grimy, torn curtain at the far end of the attic, overlooking the backyard. It was old, probably painted shut, and far too small to fit through. But it was a window, a connection to the outside. A desperate, irrational hope flickered. I sprinted toward it, ignoring the throbbing ache in my legs, ignoring the chilling presence that seemed to follow my every move, a silent predator toying with its prey. As I ran, a low, keening sound filled the attic, a sound that seemed to scrape against my very soul. It was a sound of immense, unfathomable sorrow, laced with an even more profound, ancient rage. It was the sound of something that had been waiting, and was now finally terribly awake. I reached the window, tearing at the rotten curtain. The glass was thick, covered in decades of grime, but through it, I could see the faint glow of the moon, partially obscured by clouds. Freedom. Almost. I slammed my fist against the glass, hoping to shatter it, but it held firm, rattling menacingly. I hit it again, harder, and again, the old wood groaning under the impact. Suddenly, a searing pain shot through my hand. A splinter, long and jagged, had pierced my palm. I cried out, more from frustration and terror than the pain itself. The window wouldn't budge. The keening sound grew louder, closer. I could feel the temperature in the attic plummet, and a sickening sweet smell, like old earth and ozone, filled my nostrils. It was here, right behind me. I whirled around, journal still clutched in my good hand. The shadow was closer, larger, dominating the entire far end of the attic. It stretched and contracted, like a living, breathing entity made of pure night. My legs buckled. I fell backward, landing hard against a stack of old magazines. My eyes, now adjusting to the deeper gloom, saw something else amidst the shifting darkness. Faint, almost imperceptible, were outlines within it. Not solid forms, but suggestions of things. Branches, leaves, the distinct, impossible shape of a tree, or many trees interwoven and twisted, forming a kind of skeletal organic cage within the void. It was the thing in the trees from the Super 8 film, but magnified, infinitely more terrifying and alive. The journal. My mind, despite the terror, latched onto it. My parents' journal. There had to be answers. There had to be. With trembling fingers, I tore open the worn leather cover, flipping through the pages wildly. The handwriting was my mother's, then my father's, their careful script now seeming impossibly small and frail against the enormity of the threat before me. I scanned for anything, a keyword, a warning, a solution. My eyes landed on a passage underlined multiple times in red ink, a desperate scrawl against the neat lines. It feeds on fear, feeds on memory. It seeks to know you, to unravel you, to become you. Its strength is in the forgotten, the unacknowledged. The light, it hates the light. Not just physical light, but the light of truth, of remembrance, of conscious thought. It thrives in the shadows of the mind, in the places we refuse to look. The words blurred, their meaning both terrifyingly clear and frustratingly cryptic. It seeks to know you, to unravel you, to become you. That's what it had been doing all these years, whispering in my dreams, messing with my memories, drawing me back here. It wasn't just a monster. It was something far more insidious. A psychic vampire, a devourer of identity. The light. It hates the light. I looked around the dusty attic. No windows save for the one I couldn't open. The single bare bulb in the hallway below was pathetic against the overwhelming darkness. As if sensing my understanding, the shadow entity pulsed violently. The keening intensified, now laced with a new sound. A dry, rustling hiss, like countless dead leaves skittering across a forest floor in a gale. It was coming closer, faster. The air was thick with its presence, a tangible force pressing down on me. I desperately flipped more pages. Another entry, this time in my father's more angular hand, dated just weeks before their disappearance. It is bound to this place, to the land, to the trees, the grove. That's where it originated. That's where it grew. We tried to sever it, to cut it down, but it only made it stronger. It draws its power from the roots, from the earth itself. But there is a way, a ritual, a binding, not to destroy but to contain, to push it back. It requires a sacrifice of memory, a deliberate act of letting go, of forgetting. A sacrifice of memory? A deliberate act of letting go? What did that even mean? And a ritual? My parents had been trying to perform a ritual? Was that why they vanished? Had they failed? Or had they succeeded at the cost of themselves? The shadow was now directly in front of me, its edges almost touching my knees. I could feel the cold radiating from it, a physical chill that seemed to suck the warmth from my body. The rustling hiss was deafening. I could see the impossible, shifting tree-like patterns within its depths, now clearer, more menacing. They seemed to writhe like ancient, gnarled branches reaching out to ensnare me. My gaze fell to the floor just beyond my outstretched feet. An old dusty box, half hidden beneath a faded quilt. It was a child's toy chest, painted with chipped, brightly colored animals. My toy chest. And sticking out from beneath the lid, a single familiar object. A small wooden birdhouse, intricately carved, its paint faded and peeling. The one my father and I had built together the summer I was 6. The one we'd hung in the old oak tree in the backyard. The one near the grove that I now knew held such a dark secret. A memory flashed unbidden through my mind. My father, his hands calloused and strong, guiding my small fingers as I sanded the tiny perch. His laugh, deep and resonant, as I proudly painted a crooked bluebird on the side. And then a darker memory, just after my parents vanished. Sitting alone in my room, clutching the birdhouse, whispering to it, believing they would come back if I just wished hard enough. My aunt had found it, tucked it away, saying it was time to put away childish things. The shadow lunged, not with speed, but with an awful creeping inevitability. The cold intensified, a wave of pure dread washing over me, threatening to drown me. I could feel its tendrils, not physical but mental, reaching into my mind, probing, searching, trying to unravel the threads of my identity, trying to find my fear, trying to become me. It feeds on memory, the journal had said. A sacrifice of memory. Was this it? Was this the key? To forget? To let go of the very things that made me Michael? But how? And what would be left? As the shadow engulfed me, the last thing I saw was the birdhouse, still peeking from the toy chest, a tangible link to a past that was now actively trying to consume me. And then the cold, the darkness, and the silent, hungry whispers began to creep inside my mind, seeking out the very core of who I was. I was falling not through space but through myself into a deeper, more absolute darkness. And I knew with a certainty that chilled me to my very core, that whatever was written in that journal, I might never live to read it. The thing was here, right above me, and it was no longer waiting. The air above me solidified, a presence so heavy and cold it felt like a physical weight pressing down. There was no sound, no rustle, no creak of old wood, just an absolute, suffocating silence that screamed its unnaturalness. Then a single deliberate tap. It wasn't loud, but it resonated through the floorboards, through my bones, as if a giant unseen finger had gently, yet purposefully, touched the ceiling directly above my head. My breath hitched. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to scream, to do anything but remain frozen in the inky blackness. But I couldn't move. My muscles were locked, my throat constricted. The tap came again, closer this time, or perhaps just louder in my heightened state of terror. It was like a game, a predator toying with its prey, letting me know it was there, that it knew exactly where I was, and that escape was an illusion. A chill, far colder than any winter draft, snaked down my spine. It felt like a breath, icy and stale, had ghosted across my neck. I wasn't imagining it. Something was in the room with me. Something that hadn't come through the door or the window. Something that had simply manifested. Suddenly, a violent tremor shook the floor. Not an earthquake, but a concentrated force, as if something immense had landed heavily just a few feet away. A low, guttural growl, more like the grinding of stone than the sound of any animal, vibrated through the floorboards, rattling the very nails in the old wood. It was primal, ancient, and filled with a hunger that made my stomach clench. That broke the spell. Fear, pure and unadulterated, surged through me, overriding the paralysis. I scrambled backward blindly, my hands flailing in the dark. My elbow slammed into something hard, the leg of the table. The journal, which had been within reach, clattered to the floor with a dull thud. A small, desperate sob escaped my lips. I could hear it now, moving in the darkness. Not walking, not shuffling, but a peculiar, dragging sound interspersed with sharp, clicking noises. Like something with too many joints, too many limbs, struggling to navigate a space not meant for it. Or perhaps, moving with an unnatural grace that made the sounds even more terrifying. I had to get to the journal. It was my only hope, my only weapon against this unseen horror. I crawled on my hands and knees, ignoring the pain in my scraped elbow, reaching out, blindly sweeping the floor. My fingers brushed against the smooth, cool leather cover. I snatched it up, clutching it to my chest like a lifeline. As I did, a sliver of moonlight, barely visible through a gap in the heavy curtains, illuminated a section of the floor just ahead of me. And there, etched into the dusty wood, were 3 deep, parallel gouges. They weren't from furniture. They were too precise, too deep, like something incredibly sharp and heavy had been dragged across the floor. My blood ran cold. The thing had been right there. I scrambled under the sturdy wooden table, pressing myself against the far leg. The journal still clutched tightly. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the oppressive silence that had fallen once more. I could feel its presence, a cold, watchful weight in the room, circling, searching. It felt like it was playing with me, enjoying my terror. I fumbled for the small tactical flashlight I always carried, a habit from my urban exploration days. My shaking thumb found the switch, and a narrow beam of light pierced the darkness, cutting through the heavy air. I aimed it at the journal, my fingers fumbling with the clasp. The first page was dated nearly 70 years ago. The handwriting, though elegant, was tight, almost frantic. It belonged to Sarah. August 12, 1954. Asterisk another year. Another picnic. Mother insists it's for tradition, for family. But I know the truth. We all do. We just don't speak it aloud. The woods are not ours. They never have been. We are merely guests, tolerated so long as we remember the terms. Asterisk. Asterisk, the visitor was there again. Always in the trees, just beyond the edge of the clearing. You can never quite see it clearly, only the impression of something impossibly tall, impossibly thin, swaying with the leaves even when there's no breeze. I feel them. Even when I can't see them, I feel their gaze on my back, a cold burn. Father pretends not to notice. He laughs a little too loudly, tells jokes that fall flat. Mother arranges the food meticulously, as if every sandwich, every slice of pie, is an offering. Asterisk. Asterisk, it's not a picnic, not really. It's a ritual. A yearly reminder that we are still here, still remembering, still paying the price. Asterisk. My breath hitched. Paying the price, what price? What ritual? And the visitor? It was the thing in the trees. The one in the film. I flipped to the next entry, my eyes darting nervously around the dark room, the flashlight beam a weak defense against the encroaching shadows. September 3rd, 1954. Asterisk, the harvest moon. The visitor is restless. I can feel it in the air, a tension that hums beneath the surface of everything. Our crops are failing in the lower fields, the ones closest to the old growth. It's a warning. It wants more. Or perhaps it wants something different. Asterisk. Asterisk, grandfather's journal spoke of the old ways, of the first settlers, how they disturbed something ancient when they cleared the land. They tried to drive it out with fire and steel, but it merely retreated, biding its time. Then came the sickness, the blight, the disappearances, until one of the elders, a woman named Alara, finally understood. It wasn't an enemy to be fought, but a presence to be acknowledged, to be respected, to be fed. Asterisk. Asterisk not with blood, not directly, but with something else. Something it craves. Memories. Emotions. The echo of life, perfectly preserved. That's why the picnic started. A yearly offering of joy, of innocence, of family. A perfect memory shared willingly. A feast for the senses, for the soul, captured and given. Asterisk. A chill deeper than any physical cold settled over me. Asterisk memories. Emotions. The echo of life, perfectly preserved. Asterisk the Super 8 film. It wasn't just a record. It was the offering itself. The thing didn't just appear in the film. The film was the offering. And the distortions, they weren't accidental. They were the thing consuming, twisting, taking. The film was a window into its feeding. My hands trembled so violently I almost dropped the journal. This wasn't some cryptid or misidentified animal. This was something far more terrifying. Something that fed on the very fabric of human experience. I skipped forward, desperate for answers. The entries became more erratic, the handwriting more desperate. April 17, 1955. Asterisk it's stronger, bolder. It doesn't just watch from the trees anymore. I saw it last night, a shadow among shadows near the edge of the property. It moves with an impossible speed, a fluidity that defies physics. It's not just observing, it's learning, and it's hungry. Asterisk. Asterisk the pact is weakening. My parents don't understand. They think a few more picnics, a little more joviality will appease it. But I feel it. It's tired of the same meal. It wants something fresh. Something alive. Asterisk. Asterisk I've been researching grandfather's notes. He hinted at ways to deter it, to make it retreat. Not by fighting, but by understanding its nature. Craves memories, yes, but it also fears exposure. It thrives in the unseen, the unspoken. To document it, to truly capture its essence might be its undoing. But the risk is unimaginable. Asterisk. My heart pounded. To document it. Was that what Sarah was trying to do with the camera? Not just provide an offering, but to expose it. To fight back. I kept reading, scanning pages, my eyes blurring from the strain and the fear. August 12, 1955. Asterisk the picnic. Felt wrong this year. Forced. The smiles were brittle, the laughter hollow. I brought the camera. Father was furious. He said it would antagonize it, that we must not draw attention to its presence. But I had to. I had to try. I felt its gaze like a physical touch, closer than ever before. It was no longer just in the trees. It was among us. A part of the shadow that danced at the edges of our vision. Asterisk. Asterisk I filmed everything. Every smile, every bite of pie, every sunbeam. And then I turned the camera towards the trees. Towards where I knew it was. I tried to capture it, to force it into the frame, into the light. But it resisted. The image twisted, warped. It fought back through the lens, through the very medium of capture. It tried to consume the light, to devour the memory as it was being made. Asterisk. Asterisk and then the scream. Not mine. Not Mother's. It was a tearing sound. A sound of something being pulled apart. And then silence. A silence that was worse than any scream. Asterisk. Asterisk I ran. I grabbed the film, still warm from the camera, and I ran. I didn't know what happened. I couldn't look back. I just ran. I left them there. My family. My perfect picnic. I left them to the visitor. And I know with a terrible certainty that it was my fault. I angered it. I tried to expose it. And it took them. Asterisk. A wave of nausea washed over me. Sarah had witnessed it. She had filmed her family's demise or disappearance as a direct result of her attempt to document the thing. The film wasn't just an offering. It was a desperate, failed attempt at resistance and a record of horrifying consequence. The distortions weren't just the thing feeding. They were its active struggle against being captured, against being seen. The journal continued, detailing Sarah's flight, her guilt, her desperate attempts to understand what she had unleashed. She had spent years trying to find a way to stop it, to avenge her family, to break the cycle. She had returned to the area, built this cabin not as a refuge but as a base of operations, a place to study, to prepare. She believed the thing was tied to this specific land, to the memories embedded within it. And she believed that by understanding its true nature, she could sever that tie or perhaps contain it. The entries grew more fragmented, more frantic, leading up to the present day or near enough. October 27, 2003. Asterisk, it knows I'm here. It always knows. It's drawn to the memories, to the lingering fear. Feeds on it. But I have a plan. A final gamble. I found a way to draw it out, to force it into a confrontation. Not with violence but with truth. With light. I will use the film. The very thing it twisted, the very memory it tried to consume. I will use it to bait the trap. And I will be ready. Asterisk. Asterisk, I have prepared everything. The cabin is sealed. The old projector is set up. The film is loaded. I will project it here tonight. And when it comes for its meal, for the echo of that perfect, terrible memory, it will find not just a memory but a reflection, a mirror to its own monstrous appetite, and perhaps in that reflection it will finally be wounded. Asterisk. Asterisk, if this journal is found, know this, the thing is real. It is ancient. It is intelligent. And it feeds on what makes us human. Do not try to fight it with force. Fight it with understanding. Fight it with truth. And never ever let it feast on your fear. Asterisk. The final entry was a single defiant word, scrawled across the page, almost tearing through the paper. Tonight. Tonight. Sarah's last stand. The night she tried to use the very film that documented her family's demise as a weapon against the thing. And I was here in her cabin with her journal, with the Super 8 film still sitting in its canister on the table. A sudden deafening crash erupted from the corner of the room. The old wooden wardrobe, heavy and solid, splintered and burst outwards, sending shards of wood flying. A shape, impossibly tall and impossibly thin, silhouetted against the faint moonlight filtering through the shattered window, unfolded itself from the wreckage. It was darker than the darkness around it, a void that seemed to absorb all light. Its limbs were elongated, jointed at unnatural angles. And its head, it was just a shadow, but I could feel the intensity of its gaze. 2 pinpricks of icy malevolence boring into me. It wasn't just a visitor from the trees. It was here, inside, and it was looking directly at me, under the table, holding Sarah's journal. It knew I had read it. It knew I had learned its secrets. And it was no longer content to wait. It was coming for me. It was coming for me. The air grew impossibly heavy, thick and cloying with a scent I now recognized: damp earth, decaying leaves, but underneath it, a sharp metallic tang like old blood and ozone. My heart hammered against my ribs, a trapped bird desperate for escape. I scrambled back, overturning the dining chair with a violent crash that echoed too loudly in the sudden, suffocating silence of the house. My eyes, wide with terror, were fixed on the space beneath the table. It emerged slowly, deliberately, not creeping but unfolding. First, the hand, unnaturally long fingers still clutching Sarah's worn journal. Then, an arm, impossibly thin, articulating at angles no human limb should. Finally, the rest of it, pulling itself out from the shadows, rising into the dim lamplight. It was taller than I'd imagined, skeletal and elongated, its form a grotesque parody of humanity. Its skin was the color of bruised twilight, stretched taut over prominent bones, almost translucent in places, revealing the faint tracery of veins beneath. Its head was small, pointed, with no discernible nose or ears, just a gaping maw that remained closed. And those eyes. Oh, those eyes. They were the same glinting points I'd glimpsed in the film, burning from the shadows of the trees, but now they were fully visible, large and obsidian, reflecting the lamplight with an intelligent, hungry fire that seemed to bore directly into my soul. It didn't speak with words, but a low guttural hum vibrated through the floorboards, a sound that resonated deep within my own bones, a frequency that threatened to shake me apart. It was a sound of ancient hunger, of patient waiting, of a consciousness older and more alien than anything I could comprehend. It held Sarah's journal, not just as a prop, but as a statement. It knew I had read it. It knew I had unearthed its secrets. And now it was here waiting for my response. My mind screamed, a primal wordless shriek of absolute terror. Every instinct urged me to flee, to run from this impossible nightmare that had stepped out of the static of an old film and into my living room. I pushed myself up, my legs wobbly, my gaze momentarily tearing away from the creature to search for an escape route, any escape route. The front door was too far, blocked by the dining room. The kitchen was closer. As I took a hesitant step back, the creature moved. It didn't lunge, not in the conventional sense. It simply shifted, a blur of shadow and bone, its elongated limbs contracting and extending with impossible speed and grace. It was upon me in an instant, not touching me but looming, its presence overwhelming, radiating a cold, ancient power that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. The metallic tang in the air intensified, burning my nostrils. I stumbled backwards, overturning another chair, the sound lost in the dizzying hum that now filled the entire room. I could feel its breath, or what passed for it, cold and stale, brushing against my face. Its head tilted, those obsidian eyes locking onto mine, and for a terrifying moment, I felt a probe, a cold tendril of something unseen, reaching into the deepest recesses of my mind, searching, assessing. It wasn't looking for fear, I realized, but for something else entirely. Understanding. I broke free of its silent scrutiny, scrambling towards the kitchen. My hand scrabbled at the doorframe, my lungs burning, desperate for air that didn't feel so tainted. I burst into the kitchen, grabbing the first heavy thing I could find, a cast iron skillet, its weight surprisingly comforting in my trembling hand. A pathetic weapon, I knew, against something that defied all natural laws, but it was something. I spun around, skillet raised, my breath catching in my throat. The creature stood in the kitchen doorway, its tall skeletal frame silhouetted against the dim light of the living room. Sarah's journal was still clutched in one hand, its unnaturally long fingers gripping the worn leather. It tilted its head again, a gesture unnervingly human, though its face was void of alien features. The humming softened, becoming less aggressive, more expectant. Then it did something that froze the blood in my veins. It lifted the journal, opening it to a specific page. Its long skeletal finger tapped the faded ink, a deliberate, almost instructional gesture. My eyes, still wide with adrenaline, struggled to focus from across the room. It was a drawing, crude but instantly recognizable. A Super 8 projector, sketched with frantic lines. And below it, a line of text scribbled in Sarah's familiar, elegant hand, but with an underlying tremor of desperation. Asterisk, the offering is in the light. The memory is the meal. Asterisk. My blood ran cold. The projector. The film. It wasn't just a record. It was the food. Sarah hadn't been trying to document some strange phenomenon. She'd been feeding it. The perfect picnic wasn't a memory of a ritual. It was the ritual itself. A carefully constructed, curated moment of pure, unadulterated joy, captured and preserved on celluloid. A continuous flickering feast for this thing that subsisted on the echo of happiness. Sarah, my grandmother, hadn't been a victim in the way I'd thought. She had been a priestess, an unwitting one perhaps, but a provider nonetheless. She believed she was protecting her family, protecting us by offering these manufactured perfect moments, by keeping the creature satiated, preventing it from consuming their actual lives, their real memories, their genuine joy. She had found a way to buy peace, a fragile, terrifying peace, by sacrificing the echoes of happiness. The creature lowered the journal, its gaze locking onto me once more. It didn't want to hurt me, not directly. It wanted me to understand. It wanted me to continue Sarah's work. Or perhaps it wanted a new operator for its eternal projector. A new caretaker for the silent, smiling horror. I dropped the skillet with a deafening clang that echoed through the quiet house. My mind reeled, grappling with the sheer monumental horror of it all. To destroy the film, to starve the creature, would unleash its true hunger, its raw, uncontrolled desire. It wouldn't just take memories then, it would take lives, minds, everything. The full, terrifying power of this entity, unchained and ravenous, would consume the world I knew. But to continue feeding it, to become Sarah, to live a life of staging happiness, of meticulously crafting moments of artificial joy, knowing it was all for this parasitic entity, this echo that fed on the stolen resonance of human emotion, to condemn future generations to this silent, smiling horror, to this never-ending bargain with the shadow. The thought was a chilling, sterile void. The creature took another step forward, its hum growing louder, more insistent, filling the kitchen, vibrating through the very floor beneath my feet. Its eyes, those ancient, hungry, obsidian eyes, seemed to bore into my very soul, searching for the spark of understanding, of acceptance. It wasn't asking, it was waiting. My gaze fell upon the journal again, still in its hand. Sarah's desperate notes. Her final entry, the frantic scribbles I had seen, but hadn't fully comprehended. It wasn't just about appeasement. It was about control. She had found a way to contain it, not just feed it. The film was a leash, the projector a cage, a delicate, horrifying balance. I looked at the creature, really looked at it, stripped of my initial terror, seeing it now for what it truly was. It wasn't a monster of pure malice, not in the human sense. It was a force of nature, a bizarre ecological niche, a predator that fed on the echoes of joy. And Sarah, in her desperate, brilliant madness, had found a way to manage it, to keep it from consuming everything. Slowly, almost robotically, I walked back into the living room, past the creature, towards the Super 8 projector still sitting innocently on the coffee table. Its hum softened further, almost a purr, a sound of anticipation. I reached out, my fingers trembling, and gently touched the Super 8 film. The loop of the perfect picnic. The perfect, terrible picnic. The faces of my ancestors, frozen in their manufactured bliss. I didn't destroy it. I couldn't. The weight of Sarah's legacy, of her terrible necessary burden, settled heavily upon my shoulders. Instead, I carefully, almost reverently, lifted the reel from the projector. The film, no longer just a relic, was a responsibility. A burden. A secret that would consume my life, just as it had consumed Sarah's. A silent, flickering ward against a deeper darkness. The creature watched me, its head tilted, its obsidian eyes unblinking, unwavering. It knew. It always knew. It had found its new caretaker. And as I held the film, the silent, smiling faces of my ancestors frozen in their perfect, artificial joy, I understood. The thing in the trees wasn't just a visitor. It was a permanent resident. And now, so was I. Forever bound to the flickering light of a projector, feeding a memory to keep a darkness at bay. The hum faded, replaced by the soft, mechanical whir of the projector. A sound I knew would now haunt my every waking moment. A lullaby of silent, unending dread. The perfect picnic was never truly over. It was just waiting for the next showing. And I would be there, ensuring the show went on for as long as I could bear it. For as long as I could keep the echo fed.